Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 2025 Directors Closeup Spirit Awards edition. I am Maria Raquel Bossi, Senior Director of Education and International Programs at Film Independent. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank all the partners that make Film Independent's important work possible. Thank you to this year's incredible supporters of the Directors Closeup, the Directors Guild of America, IMDb Pro, and SAG Indie. And thank you to our 2025 Film Independent Spirit Awards supporters, Premier Partner Lavazza, Principal Partner IMDb Pro, and official partners Bullet Frontier Whiskey, Fiji Water, and Mirabal. We also appreciate your support and your devotion to the independent film community. I'm really excited right now to kick off our series with the Spirit of Independence Roundtable, showcasing some of the directors who are nominated for Best Feature at this year's Spirit Awards. If you haven't gotten a chance to watch these films yet, please make sure to find the time to see them because they truly represent the true spirit of independent film. Here with us are Ali Abbasi, director of The Apprentice. Ali, welcome.
Hello.
Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Coralie Fargeat, director of The Substance. Welcome, Coralie.
Hi, thank you.
Great to see you. Greg Kwedar, director of Sing Sing, joining us from Sundance with another film there.
Hi, nice to be with you all.
And next up, we have RaMell Ross, director of Nickel Boys.
Hello.
Great to see you. Next, Alonso Ruizpalacios, director of La Cocina. Where are you, Alonso? There you are. Great to see you.
Hi.
And last but not least, Jane Schoenbrun, director of I Saw the TV Glow.
What's up?
Welcome, Jane. And our moderator for this afternoon is our very own Jennifer Wilson. She's the senior programmer at Film Independent. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for having me at the Director's Close-Up this year. In the past, the Spirit of Independence panel was always moderated by Film Independent President Josh Welsh, who, as many of you know, passed away a few weeks ago. And if it's okay with everyone, I'd love to dedicate this panel to him, say thank you to Josh. I know that Josh loved moderating almost more than anything else that he did in his job. I'm honored to be the one to do the panel this year. If you're watching, Josh, I know I won't do as good a job as you, but I'm very honored to do the panel this year. Thank you so much to all the phenomenal filmmakers participating today. Your films inspired me so much this year. And I'm so excited to talk to you all. I'll be asking you questions for about 50 minutes, and then the rest of the Q&A I'll dedicate to audience questions. So to everybody who is watching, if you want to ask a question, if you want me to ask a question, just type it in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen, and I will try to get to your question towards the end of the Q&A. Okay, so just to establish a baseline for the conversation, I would love to hear from all 6 of you about the starting point for your films. How were you inspired to make this film? Could you talk a little bit about the development process, whether it was an original script by you or someone else, or an adaptation of a book or play? And let's start with Coralie, director of The Substance.
So hi, everybody. So for me...
Hey, Coralie.
Hi. So for me, it started after my first feature film, Revenge, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I felt that for me, the right way to keep making films was to write my own project. And I knew, there was this theme, that was living with me, I think, since my whole life, about how the way you're seen, define your place in society and the pressure that it can put on you. And the movie coincided with the moment I had passed my 40s and I was going toward my 50s. And I really started to have those insane violent thoughts that my life was going to be over because, I wouldn't fit anymore the representation that was of youth, beauty, etc. that was, expected from a woman. So I felt it was for me the time to do something with that. And to really turn it into what I loved the most to do, which is genre film, which is for me a very cathartic way to express myself as a filmmaker. But I also knew that the way I wanted to do it was very specific, very untraditional, unconventional, and very violent and excessive. So I took the decision I took two decisions at the time. First, that I wanted to co-produce the film because I knew that I wanted to be involved in every step, of the process to really give to me the maximum chance to do the film that I wanted. And also to write my script on spec because, from the same idea that you pitch to someone, you can have 1,000 different scripts and 1,000 different movies. And if you start working with people that are fancying something else that what you're going to achieve at the end of the writing, I didn't want to have, bad surprises of the wrong matches. So I took the decision to write for a year and a half, figuring out that when my script would be ready, then I could find the best partners for me for that project. And so that's what happened when I had finished the script. Then I discussed with different producers, and I decided to work with Working Title as co-producers because to me, they were kind of the middle bridge that I needed between me being French with, my way of making films, but also the American elements that I needed for my film in terms of budget, in terms of, the movie I knew I wanted it to make it in English, but I needed strong producer to protect me, to protect my vision until the end. So that's, how it started. And I felt like for me, doing the movie in France was almost impossible at the level of budgets that I needed because the movie was not, in the traditional genre. It was not like straight horror when you can identify clearly, okay, it's going to bring those type of peoples in the theaters. It was a very challenging project. Also, it was the moment that COVID started to hit. So all the financiers were very, very shy about going towards, bold and innovative films. And so in the end, that was for me what allowed me, to make the movie that I needed, but which was kind of following my own process, my own way of, keeping the creative control on the film. And most importantly, I would say, being able to craft the movie with the rules I needed for the movie, with a shooting that was, organized in a specific way, not respecting going through the traditional process, but inventing my own process for the film.
Wonderful. Thank you, Coralie. Let's move on to RaMell Ross, director of Nickel Boys.
I knew that was going to happen. I was so hoping to go last. I just knew it. I was trying to make not eye contact through the camera. I was like looking away.
I'm sorry. You're up. You're up.
Got me. Yeah, I love hearing about y'all's processes, and also congratulations to everybody. Yeah, this film was an adaptation of a Colson Whitehead novel, and I was fortunate to have been asked to do an adaptation. And yeah, so many reasons why. It takes, I think, maybe 1,000 reasons for me to do something. It's very rarely a single thing. And I think since I've been talking about this a bunch, I feel like some of the core reasons why I wanted to make the film was to sort of bring the way in which the Dozier School boys, because it's based on it's based on a true story. It's based on actual facts, not a true story. Bring the way that these boys were treated in this reform school in North Florida into the larger cultural conversation as to how they're seen. And as I like to say, film and photography as a technology of racism, that, the history of the camera, the history of its relationship to representation and objectification, et cetera, produces a visual constitution, an American visual constitution that allows us to treat people a certain way. And so with that in mind, Coulson's narrative is about two boys who meet and at a reform school, and they have a relationship over time, but it's just like the perfect, clear story that everyone knows really well. So it's quite easy to distill to its tentpole moments, and then you can populate the rest of that space with poetry and with visual lyricism, or what I like to call the epic banal, a way of making an image that sort of dilates time and allows it to be something that's not illustrative and not representative and not metaphoric and not symbolic, but all of those simultaneously and experiential. And this is ideal, of course. It doesn't happen or work all the time. And kind of in that sense, you're allowed to give the Dozer School boys and the Nickel boys like more life than death, because when we're making films, we need to organize it for emotional impact, and we need to organize it for a type of continuity that takes the character on a path that's fulfilling for the audience and also explores the character in certain ways, et cetera, et cetera. But there is something about stories in which something really painful and true and horrible happened to someone, in which we kind of organize things around that event. And that event becomes the almost most important moment. But my co-writer and I wanted to take the opposite approach. And then, of course, I think people know that the film is shot point of view, which is a fun thing. And yeah, I don't want to take up too much time, but I can talk, as all of you can, for literal ever about our films, like right now, forever. So I'll pass it.
Thank you, RaMell. Let's see. Let's have Greg go next for Sing Sing, our second film about being incarcerated while Black.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm very honored to be on this panel with these filmmakers. I've seen all 5 of these brilliant films, and I've gotten to meet many of you, and that's like the main joy, I think. I mean, award season, all that can be totally crushing, and it can drive you insane, and yet this kind of community building that happens is, I think, the gift that I'm going to take with me from all of this. And our project, I've been working on for over 8.5 years, and I came across it quite unexpectedly. I was producing a short documentary inside of a maximum security prison in Kansas, and it was my first time ever behind the walls of a prison. And we were doing a tour of the facility, and we were making a film about something else, but I passed by a cell, and there was a young man raising a rescue dog inside of a cell. And it just stopped me in my tracks, because it upended every expectation I had about prison and incarcerated people that was largely propped up on the movies I grew up watching, my own industry. And what I saw in the cell was something decidedly different. I saw healing that was happening in both directions between this man and this animal. And I was just in the hotel room that night, desperate to know, was there anyone else out there doing things differently in prison, like what I had just seen? And so I typed into Google who is doing things differently in prison. And near the top of the search field was this program in New York, Rehabilitation Through the Arts, that was founded in 1996 at Sing Sing. And they had been putting on plays ever since. And they've been covered in all the major press. They'd done all the classic plays. But there was this Esquire magazine article from 2005 of a original production that had been performed for 4 nights only at Sing Sing, of a time traveling musical comedy called Breaking the Mummy's Code. And I just was like, what is that? I felt what it was I felt the joy in the process doing this, like, literally insane play. And in our movie, we embellish nothing. And yet it was this playfulness juxtaposed against the environment it was set within that felt sort of rebellious and urgent and alive. And honestly, just sort of this invitation, I wanted to feel some of that joy myself. And I reached out to the playwright and got on the phone with him very quickly, this guy, Brent Buell. And had this wonderful conversation. At the end of it, he was just like, you know, if you really want to understand the story, you need to meet the men who really live this. Come to New York, come to my apartment. We'll have breakfast with some of my friends. And many of the men who star in this film now, alongside Coleman Domingo, the majority of our cast is comprised of formerly incarcerated alumni of this program itself, and they were all around this table, and there was this amazing energy. It was a feeling in the room, the sort of warmth. They kind of recreated in around this breakfast table the kind of protective space of creativity that they had when they were inside the program itself. And I was with my creative partner, Clint Bentley, and we were just looking at each other. We were like, if we could just translate how this room feels into a movie, we have something special. And we were like, it'll, you know, we'll make it later this year. And 8.5 years later, here we are. And I think, you know, a lot of, I also will pass the mic too. Also could talk for hours, like RaMell said. But I think the 6 years of development to finally shooting the film, which we shot in 18 days in New York and many real life locations, including Sing Sing. The big challenge, I think, as writers was we would have these indelible experiences as volunteers in the program in conversation with many of these men. And we would then go away and try to be the filmmaker and write it ourselves and do all, and it always just felt like an imitation of that room and the way it felt. Because what we realized much later in the process was if we were going to tell a story specifically that is really driven by community, we needed to shift how we made films, and our process needed to reflect the community we were trying to tell a story about. And we needed to sort of open this circle. And then the real Divine I and Divine G, of which our movie is sort of centered around their friendship, once they came into that process with us, we finally were writing in a way that was alive in the way that these rooms were. And so that's when it finally clicked for us.
Okay, fantastic. Let's go on to Alonso for La Cocina.
What was the question?
Like, what was the question?
Sorry. How did
The
we
starting
how did-
point, yeah, for your film.
sorry.
Yours is
First,
based on a play, right?
yeah. So yes. So the La Cocina is based on a play by British playwright Arnold Wesker. And I started adapting this. Well, actually, so I'll start earlier. I got to know this play when I was a drama student in London, and I was working after school in a restaurant called the Rainforest Cafe in Piccadilly Circus, and it wasn't exactly like a Michelin star place. It was like a big tourist trap that serves a lot of people, and you have to dress up. I started first in the kitchen, and then I moved up as a waiter, and I worked for a while there, and that's kind of where I fell in love with kitchens and the drama of kitchens and the international community experience that kitchens are, the pirate ship that kitchens can be. So and that's where I got to know the play by Arnold Wesker when I was in drama school, and it sort of helped me understand my working days better and get through them. And so I kind of fell in love with the play, and I said that one day I want to do something with this, and then I directed the play as a stage play about, I don't know, maybe it's like 14 years ago. And I have a theater company in Mexico, a very dysfunctional theater company. We sometimes it's a very irregular thing, but I try to go back to it whenever I can. And we put this play on, and that's where I started. After we'd finished putting it as a play, I started writing the script, and I thought it was going to be my first movie. And it took me, I don't know, many years. That there was like 4 other movies in between before coming to this one, because the script just wasn't right. There was something also that helped along the way was I'll tell this little story and then I'll pass the mic on. I was with my wife about 10 years ago. We went to New York, and in Christmas time we ended up there in New York City in Christmas time. We didn't have a lot of money, and we stayed in a friend's house, and then our friends went away and we were left by ourselves for Christmas Eve, and we were like, well, what are we gonna do on Christmas? So we went to the cinema, to Times Square. That was like our Christmas Eve. And as I was going to the stationery, no, what do you call it, where you buy popcorn, the confectionery, concession stand, that's it, sorry. And as I was going to the concession stand, I realized that the carpet was soaking wet. It was like really completely drowned. And as I came closer, I realized that the cherry Coke machine was broken, and it was just spilling endlessly like a spring, like an endless spring. Very strange. And there was very few people in the cinema on Christmas Eve, and I told one of the guys, hey, the machine is broken, and he just went, yeah, I know, and he carried on serving popcorn. And to me that was like the perfect image of late capitalism, all this like kind of waste and this endless river of cherry Coke. And the film we went to see that night was the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, with Rooney Mara. And when we came out of the cinema, I told my wife, one day I'm gonna work with her. And so this film kind of, it took me back to New York. It was also, I mean, hearing that Coralie shot her film outside, a very American film outside of the United States. We shot ours also in Mexico. That was interesting, and I would love to hear more about that experience. So anyway, yeah, that's where I kind of, that kept me adapting the screenplay, and it took a long time to get it right. It's adapting theater. I had never adapted anything before also, and I find that the original material eventually gets in the way, and you have to like kill it. You have to. I at one point I told Arnold Wesker, the playwright, in my head, I'm sorry for what I'm about to do, and I just put him away, and I never looked at the book back. And I think that's when the adaptation started working for me, when I really did not look back at the original anymore. So yeah, it was a long process.
It's funny, when I first saw the tank, the lobster tank in your film, and it's like central place in that restaurant, it did make me think of the Rainforest Cafe. And I used to go to the Rainforest Cafe in Chicago, and the one in Chicago had a gigantic moray eel in it. That was terrifying to me, but also fascinating. Like, I just wouldn't be able to stop looking at it, and I would be like sad when we were called to our table. So
I find the fish tank, the lobsters in like Red Lobster or those places, I'm always like just drawn to them because they're so sad in
it
there.
looks sad, yeah.
Yeah, it is very sad.
Okay, next, let's go with Jane for I Saw the TV Glow.
Hey.
Hi, Jane.
Hi. Yeah, what a pleasure to be here with everybody, and an honor. Yeah, I think like anybody, I could answer this question in 20 different ways because a film is never about one thing. It's, at least for me, like a lot of crossing obsessions and influences adding up over years and years, as everyone has talked about. I remember early on, well, I had made one film. I made my first narrative feature for about $100,000. And it was a wonderful process because it was both a coming out, that film took like 7 or 8 years, and while working on it, I was coming out as trans, first to myself and then to others. But that was also embedded in the film. Like, it was very much a film about dysphoria, and a film that like came from this very pure place that I personally think like many of our great films come from, of like not knowing exactly what I wanted to say, but trying to use like the language of cinema to talk about feelings that that at the time I didn't quite understand. And so I think having done that, and ultimately like having it be like a liberatory and meaningful creative process for myself and for others, I just tried to start from the same place. I wrote the film really early in my like physical transition. I had been on hormones for maybe like 2 months when the script finally had like was ready to come out, and it came out both slowly in that I had been, you know, outlining and working on it and thinking about it obsessively for years, but very quickly, and that I kind of just like locked myself in my bedroom and, you know, staggered out a couple days later and was like, oof, I can't do that many times in this life. But it's a film about like what I was going through at the time, which was like the sort of overwhelming feeling of early transition, which, you know, like same kind of thing when I got on antidepressants, where it's like all of the bad side effects hit before the good hits. And, you know, I was like being in the process of estranging from my family, and just like my whole life was exploding around me. And I think I was thinking a lot about, it's a film about like the realization that like home can also be something that confines you. And I think in pulling on those threads, I was thinking a lot about like growing up in the American suburbs, which, you know, films are correct about the American suburbs, and that they are like a place of conformity and homogeny. And I knew that, but I loved, when I was growing up, television about the suburbs. You know, I like grew up watching the suburbs being reflected back to me on TV and these like American television shows. And I think I was like processing how like the romance that those portrayals of the suburbs had like kind of sold back to me and convinced me of something, that there was something beautiful that I had sort of like seen in the glow of a screen, but there was also something sinister in it. And I think the film at its inception point came from wanting to unpack that. Yeah, I think that's it.
The pink opaque kind of reminded me of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Did you draw any inspiration from Buffy or other American TV shows like it?
Yeah, the film's mostly about Buffy, honestly. All that trend stuff is like number 2. It's like mostly
It's just
about how
Buffy.
much time I spent on Buffy.
And last but not least, we have Ollie for The Apprentice.
Yes. No, I need to concentrate because I was being really like entertained, and it was really exciting to hear this, guys. I think you know, people sometimes see me as contrarian. I mean, I am contrarian, but I also in that see my role also as a like a rebalancer, or you know, I don't know, equalize. That's an action movie, Equalizer. But you know, and I think that a lot of the stuff I've done over the years is because I feel I feel like someone needs to do something about this thing. It's not necessarily supposed to be me, but it sort of sometimes, maybe oftentimes, ends up being me. And you know, I knew very little of Donald Trump. You know, I saw him maybe first time really properly. You know, I grew up in Iran. I came to Europe when I was like 19. He was not really in my orbit. Um, and I saw him coming down the escalator and all that, and I was like, "Who's this clown?" You know, and I'm not saying this in an offensive way. I was like, he's really like clown. I mean, and everyone else seemed to be laughing at him too, you know. So that was my experience with him. And I wasn't excessively interested in the US election at the time. And I think the time that he really got my attention maybe was when, you know, I had done a movie Border and I wanted to come to Tel Aviv Film Festival and show it. And then I found out that I can't because there's like a Muslim ban or Arab ban or whatever, Trump ban, whatever what it was. And it took me like, you know, it was like a political campaign almost to get me in. And there's like senators and Congress people had to write for me. And then I came there and I think the first thing, and I just had a team in US manager and all that. And I think the first project someone brought to me was like, hey, we love this like Trump movie you did. Do you want to do stuff about Trump? I'm like, what's the connection? So in that way, it was a bit random, you know, part of it. The other part of it is I always thought he's Mr. America. I thought that how can Americans not make something or 5 movies or 20 movies about this guy? Because, you know, as much as you might love him, hate him, dislike him, whatever, he is such a presence. And it's like you cannot. I was always thinking like there should be someone doing it. There should be someone doing it, you know? And then I realized that, you know, the Amy Bear and Gabe Sherman, who's a political journalist and been following Donald Trump and, you know, interviewed him, wrote the script originally. Their pitch to me was, you know, we want a POV from outside. We don't want someone who's neither the Republican or Democrat or conservative, liberal, not in that sort of matrix, so to speak. Also, what I found out later, there's also like, I think probably like, I don't know, 30 other American filmmakers who passed because this is not like, it's not going to help your career, you know, you know what I mean? So I think being this sort of a little bit contrarian or, you know, rebalanced or whatever you call it, I was like, well, I guess I gotta do it, you know? And then I think the process was really the useful thing about this, me being the outsider, was I got to sort of go through this with fresh eyes, not having preconceptions about, you know, Donald Trump, his family, his business, Roy Cohn. Yeah, I got to, you know, get to know them like, you know, step by step. And I saw this world where I think Gabe knew very intimately, and you know, from the inside, I got to see it from the outside. And you know, I try to sort of contribute to that outside thing to the script. You know, when I was doing the drafts, I was more focused on, you know, getting the sort of the bigger structure. I was, you know, I told him the first time we had this conversation, his story reminds me so much of Redmond Barry and Barry Lyndon. You know, someone who sort of climbs a ladder without knowing where the ladder goes. It's just about climbing, you know, and you know, this ambivalence, which I think is you know, has been part of him. And then I think the last thing I want to say is maybe throughout this process, you know, after the sort of the funny accident and the Trump ban and all that, like all those like sort of superficial things, you know, sort of I went past those. I realized also maybe there's another reason for me to do this. And that is like as someone who grew up in Iran and in Middle East, you know, we have a different view of US politics. Like for someone like me, Ronald Reagan, George W, George H, whatever, they're not hugely different. You know, Bill Clinton is not hugely different from the predecessor and after. Even I can go as far as say Barack Obama is not very different from, I mean, he's quite different from Trump, but the point is the bigger US politics system and the power machine is sort of the same, seeing it from that side. And I guess that I felt like this is the kind of point of view I want to bring to the table, that this is not about this guy who's a bad apple and a monster and everyone, else is innocent and tried hard but couldn't stop him. This is about a whole system, and it's a systematic thing. And that's where I can sort of see this with fresh eyes, hopefully.
Thank you, Ollie. So let's go back to RaMell and your POV. So when I watched your film for the second time, I actually made a decision to pay attention in particular to the POV and when it was changing and what was going on in the story, which was very powerful, and I took what I took from it. I'm just wondering how you and your team came to the decision of doing the POV shooting, and then also how did you decide which character's POV you wanted and in those moments, because sometimes there's no POV and we see both of the boys together, like in that beautiful scene where they're looking up into like a mirrored ceiling.
Yeah. The point of view, which my DP and I would ultimately call a sentient perspective, that was like every time it's used in the film, it's written into the script. Like the script writing process was super rigorous. Every image, I think I came up with maybe 5 images that we ended up using while we were shooting, and Jocelyn came up with 1, but every image was scripted. Every like the camera movement was scripted. The switching POVs was scripted. And this was, I think, probably the only way that we could have got the film pushed through, because the film shooting style is so just outside of traditional cinema or commercial cinema. You really have to, we're grilled during the process of pitching it, like, why not here? Why not here? Like the first question you have to ask yourself if you're going to give POV to a character is, why doesn't everyone have point of view? And then maybe Hattie has it too, or maybe this person. And so I think, the writing process really solidified who would get it and when. And of course, it's based on, which I think is I think maybe one of the most enjoyable part of the process was actually trying to write from what the character is seeing. It was kind of like a low-hanging fruit revelation when I was like, oh, when we're watching cinema, we're just judging people. All we're doing is we imagine a person in the world, but we never imagine that person in the world. And that's not true. Obviously, as directors and as writers, all of us, like, we're imagining the characters deeply and like we're in their heads essentially. But in terms of its representation, very much so, they're always in a place. We're never in their place, and I guess relatively. And so that was how we came to jumping from point of view, and then when not to use point of view, to allow for, kind of like the central theme, which is their perspective starting to swap, or allow the audience to have to question who's looking. Is it them? Is it Turner? Is it Elwood? And then sort of try to decipher the world through the language that we've initiated for each person representing their point of view. So.
Right. We still have you? Oh, you froze for a second.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You're here. You're back. And
Cool.
it becomes all especially poignant at the end when we realize that a character that we are looking at and thought that we knew who he was is someone completely different at the end. So that the POV, I felt like, really built up. It helped to build up to that moment. And so you had to reevaluate everything in your mind from the beginning of the movie, which was fascinating.
I'm glad that worked for you.
I loved it. all your films are so special to me. I loved really deep diving into all of them and just yeah, feeling a passion for all of them. For Greg, the moment in your film where Divine I and Divine G have the argument, and Divine I calls Divine G the N word, and Divine G says, "We don't say that in here. We say beloved." And and then the scene where they find out, each of them are finding out whether they got parole or not. And Divine I does get parole, and he says, I wouldn't be here without you, beloved. It's the first time, he actually uses beloved. Were things like that from stories from Clarence and the other inmates? Is that a practice that they actually had in the prison?
Without question, I think it's very indicative of that community storytelling process. I first learned of that actually at the very first Zoom meeting where Clarence, who plays a version of himself as Clarence Divine I. Macklin, was meeting with Coleman Domingo for the first time, and I was just kind of a fly on the wall for their conversation, and they were just telling stories of their lives, and as Coleman recounts this, he's from West Philly, and he was saying he was saying the word colloquially, and then Clarence just mentioned, well, within this program, we use this term instead. And Coleman just kind of paused, and his eyes just started watering. And then he looked at me and said, "This feels like it belongs in the film." And so as we were structuring the story together, and we wrote this, the kind of that last version 6 years in, we wrote in a really unique way, in that Clint, Clarence, Divine G, and I would have these conversations, and we would then go and write a handful of scenes, and then Clarence and Coleman would actually get on Zoom, and we would share our screen, and they would read these scenes cold for the first time, and we would break them down, and we would talk about what was working, and everything from dialogue to intention and the prose or action, and then we would talk about where we would go next in the story. And so we were writing and rehearsing in tandem. And so a lot of these discoveries would come through this experience together. And so to then apply this sort of sentiment of beloved across the movie, it was sort of first to have Divine G share that almost in his position as a leader figure within the program, and to kind of draw a line in a way, in a very tense moment between the two of them, when it's like, what is going to happen here? And when he says that to Clarence, in the movie, he literally has nothing to say back. He just watches Coleman's character Divine G, without blinking, and then he just steps off frame. And then we stay with Coleman, and he had been holding his breath the whole time, because he was like, I don't know what's about to happen with this guy across from me. And then that exhale is like, we're all kind of exhaling with him. And then the moment you mention, when these sort of tables turn, and when Clarence gets this sort of unbelievable news that he's home, and Coleman is Divine G, despite his overwhelming evidence, his clemency was denied. And the reality was, in real life, he had to wait 7 more years before he actually made parole and went home, between that moment. And so for Clarence to say that back to him, had this real tenderness. And then the last time it's used, they say it to each other in friendship. And so that was how we felt like it could sort of matriculate across the story, and align with sort of the themes of their friendship, and be honest to their real life friendship.
Thank you for talking about that. I was really touched by it. Every single time they said it afterwards, I just I felt like a catch in my throat, like, oh, I'm gonna cry again. Let's see. So this question is for Alonso, La Cocina. Can you say, Alonso, can you say more about Nonzo's story of the Italian immigrant bathed in the green alien light, and then the very same thing happening to Pedro at the end of the film? Can you talk about creating that moment? Was that something that was in the play?
So yeah, so that moment wasn't in the original play. There is that scene where that happens in the middle of the play and of the film, when the after the lunch rush, all the cooks come out into the alley and have a little breather, and the rhythm sort of goes down and the temperature goes down. And that scene in the play, in Wesker's play, was the reason for wanting to make this into a film. It was, it's the I think the one scene that kept me going with coming back to the adaptation, and because there was something so beautiful and honest in the way that it's just these six cooks sharing a cigarette and a beer and just talking about their dreams. And it's something that when I was working in a kitchen and later in a bar, that was like the best moment always of every shift, just going out for a smoke and getting to know people. It's the only time you get to know people. And I think Wesker captured it so beautifully in the play. And so, but when I was writing it, the story, that there is like a monologue in the middle of that scene, but that it I mean, the play is from 1957, and it just felt it had aged. It didn't feel right, and I wanted something else. So, but I did want this moment where Nonzo kind of connects everyone, and so uh, it's a long story, but I'll try to make it really short. There's these paintings, this tradition of paintings in Mexico called ex votos, which are very naive paintings that are sold outside churches. And when you ask for something from a saint, you have to pay back with an ex voto. That's like a tradition, a very old tradition. And so there are these artists outside churches that paint whatever it is that the saint granted you. And it's like, it's a scene. It's like sometimes it has a couple of vignettes, sometimes it's just one vignette, and it's very naive art, and it's very beautiful. And I try to collect some of them. And one time I saw one that was about a migrant who thanked the Virgen de Guadalupe, our like Mexican Virgin, for bringing him back from an alien abduction. And the drawing was of this guy working in the fields in California, who had been abducted by an alien spaceship. And I mean, that just blew my mind, and it made me think about this term that is now coming back, by the way, in the current political climate, of calling immigrants aliens. And so this relationship between aliens and space aliens and all of that just kind of gave me this story, and I wanted the film to make us think about the first migrations into America, and the first migrations of the 20th century, the whole Ellis Island experience. And so I dived into that, did a little research on that, and just found some incredible stuff, like how they marked all the people who would have a hand missing, or people who were so called defective in some way. They would be marked with a chalk X and be sent back. This was the experience for a lot of the Italians and a lot of the Irish coming by boat to Ellis Island. So Nonso telling this story that is about this miracle, this miracle of abduction, it just kind of helped me touch on the kind of the older migrations. When I was preparing for this film, I did 2 research trips to New York, and I interviewed a lot of undocumented cooks in kitchens. I went to like just a lot of kitchens and talked to people, and I had like hours and hours of recorded conversations. And the one common thread was this sadness, this idea that something is lost forever, that there is no going back. And even when they go back to Mexico, they have like this scar. And one of them described it like a permanent supernatural scar. That's what he said. And so that kind of made me think about this. It reminded me of this ex voto that I saw with the alien abduction. And so when I was writing the script and kind of thinking, well, how am I going to end this now? Just going back to the alien abduction, it seemed amusing and strange, and it felt right, I guess, that Pedro was, abducted by aliens at the end of the film, and maybe in his head, maybe in reality. But it was something that, I don't know, just felt right.
Thank you. For Coralie, is Coralie still with us? I know she was maybe gonna have to leave early.
I'm here.
She's there.
Yeah.
Can you talk about this incredible sound mix? The second time I was watching the film, I really noticed the sound and how you had kind of a soundtrack underneath the main soundtrack that sort of repeated the sounds that you would hear and then distort. Could you talk about creating that?
Yes, for me, the sound is one of the major elements of my filmmaking, because it's really, as I don't write a lot of dialogue, and I mainly express myself with visual and sounds, which really build the way I love to share my stories. As more of an experience, for the audience. And so it starts even from the screenplay. When I start to write, the first thing that I do while I'm, thinking about the theme and my story, I research images and I research sound. So I need to find the kind of frequency that I want for the music, which is going to be one of the main expression of the film that's going to put the audience into some kind of very specific world. And then while I write, I listen to a lot of music, the type of music that inspires me for the film, and which kind of also guide me through the writing of the scenes. So I remember for The Substance, I listened to a lot of music that were quite experimental, but also organic, almost like heartbeats, almost as if they were it was a music from the experience of a body. So I listened a lot to Micah Levy from Under the Skin, and also other, music that were so experimental and so like an experience, because this was really what the movie was about, a body experience. And so then I also write the sound in my screenplay, because I know that the way I write, also because I edit, I'm really visualizing the scene the way I want it to be felt. And sound is really part of that. So for instance, I know that the shrimp scene, the fact that we go into this kind of immersive bubble is going to multiply the violence of the scene, and is going to share something very powerful in the way it's going to be felt by the audience, of the violence of that guy who kinds of, crushed the shrimps the way he crushed the character. And so during the shooting, it's an element that I have strongly in mind, because I know exactly for each scene how much the sound is going to have an important place, sound design and music. And I must say that it's something that kind of creates a very unique experience for me, because I'm the only one on set who has this very much in mind about how much it's going to influence a scene. So for instance, I know that I'm going to need to have a shot that is that amount of time that can seem very, very long during the shoot. But when the sound will be there, it will give a whole other rhythm. So it's one of the things that is the most difficult to communicate with your crew, even with your actors, because as much as you can explain, they don't have it in mind the same way than yours. But it's something that I really stick very strongly, because I know that it's going to be very part of how much the story and the rhythm of the film is going to be built. And so then when I start the edit, I start to work already with some sounds, because it's what, kind of start to create the rhythm of the edit, the rhythm of the scenes, which can change dramatically depending on, how much the sound is there or not there yet. For this one, I worked with temp music because I didn't have my composer when I started the editing. So I used a lot of temp music to already build the kind of mood and the kind of vibes that I wanted to create. And I also record a lot of stuff myself, so I can create some temp elements that already give some kind of vibes. And during the editing, I have a first moment where I start to work with my sound crew, where I hand to them a few scenes that are not finished, but that are so important in terms of sound design. I'm thinking, for instance, about the burst sequence, that they can give me a first layer of sound that they work on, which then allows me to get more precisely into the edit, because those scenes, when you have the sound design in place, it totally transforms the rhythm and how you feel it. And something that could seem very long, all of a sudden kind of seems short, and you say, oh, I need to make it longer, because now, there is all that. So that's been the most challenging thing with the edit of that film, which is so much linked into the right rhythm, the right thing that escalates at the right time, that until everything is there, it's not there. And then, each new element that arrive, whether it is sound, music, or VFX that is finalized, is going to change the way you're going to feel the cut, And so until the very, very end, almost the final day of mix, I kept my edits not locked, because I was also editing myself. So it was something I could do. And I was working with a crew who understood this process, because I knew that, everything had to work together until the very end. And so, and even, like in the mix, when you have all those final elements, it really transforms. Even until then, the mix can really change the impression that you're going to have into of your movie. Like a mix can change so much a scene, so much an intention, and whether you push the music super hard or or put some kind of effects, you're going to have a total different experience of the film. So I truly believe, and I know that I'm here until the very last day of the mix, because I know that everything can be transformed and potentially not the way you want, and have a different experience until the very end. And it's about my sound recorder, re-recorder was great, because it was so it was listening so much to my intentions, what I wanted, and trying to convey that, and to explore and refine all the elements that would get us there. And so, yes, that's through the very, very beginning, from the very first script line until the very final day of mix. Sound is a whole, is here during the whole process.
Amazing. Thank you. For Jane, I saw the TV Glow. Can we talk about the pink opaque? In the film, you know, the two kids, Maddie and Owen, are both obsessed with the show, but they have very different reactions to the show. One has a reaction of seeing themselves in it and feeling like it saves their life, and the other person seems to deny the power of the show, and still lives this very repressed life. Do you think that that's your comment on how you feel, how media affects queer people?
I have no comment on how media. I don't know. Like the internet is a weird place, right? Where people are always having, what's the word, like parasocial relationships with their media, and they want like Harry Potter and Ron Weasley to kiss, and they're going to spend a lot of their life doing it, and hoping for it, and I think I can only speak about myself, like growing up pretty lonely and growing up in a space where I didn't feel like I could actualize and be myself. It was very easy to have relationships with things on a screen that were very personal and emotional and probably um dissociative in many ways, because it was like a two-way mirror, right? Like I could see them, but they couldn't see me. Like I could put myself, my feelings, my desires, my emotions, my love into these entertainments that had of course been made to sort of encourage me to do exactly that, and also as a bonus to sell various products. I put a lot of myself into Buffy, but into fiction, and I think so much of that, like I don't have the same experience of it now that like I'm less repressed and more a part of the world. Like I still love art, and I still watch art as a huge part of my life, but it's like there's much less longing. And I think the film is trying to comment on this experience of like that kind of like longing, especially as one is coming of age. The characters in the movie both age significantly as the movie goes on. We start in this like sort of pre-pubescent moment and then catch them at the beginning of high school, like right on the boundary of puberty. And I think especially for trans folks, like puberty is this like a moment when a wrongness is sort of first cemented, and we see two different reactions to that feeling, both sort of played out through the genre metaphor of this show feeling more real to them than real life. One character sort of makes it their business to sort of like take the feeling that they found in that show and make it real, like explore a way to like live a life where they're honoring that feeling. And the other character sort of like becomes more and more dependent on the fiction, becomes more and more dependent on sort of like mainlining, consuming like an entertainment as a way of like dissociating or hiding from himself until it reaches a breaking point. And I've been both of those people, like the film definitely came from a moment where I was just like depressed on the couch watching 5 movies a day, and yeah, I think my movies are like interested in consumption and interested in like our current media climate. Like I think it's an interesting thing to talk about through the medium of film, because obviously like the film is a part of that process, and the film is being consumed on a screen presumably, which is like,
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you ever have like a meta or just like a wow moment thinking about how the film itself is talking about something that it's now doing too, because it exists?
yeah, it's all built into it for me.
Yeah.
I think, like I love the idea. It's a very like fertile metaphor for me, and I think like different filmmakers have different obsessions, right? Obviously that they return to throughout their careers. I always think about like Abbas Kiarostami and his obsession with the car, you know, and just like movement, and what a beautiful thing to capture on film. And what like a beautiful metaphor for like the transition that a film can provide. And yeah, there was this aha moment when I was working on my first film where like the screen itself, this thing that is invisible or that is always, it's always there when we watch movies, but it's seldom the subject of the movie. I find like a lot to sort of delve into in that metaphor, you know, and I think it's a versatile metaphor and you can talk about a lot of things through it. But I do think also that it like, it's certainly like my life, like the screen has just been this constant presence, you know, and like the way that the screen has evolved through my years, and like the way that identity, reality, communication, love, all like every element of life is mediated through this glowing box. Like there's just a lot there for me to like to dig into to hopefully say something personal.
Thank you, Jane. Are you guys ready for some audience questions? Because here we go. For Coralie, why did you decide to make the story in English? Could it not have worked or have been produced in French?
No, from the start, I knew that this story for me resonated in a very like international way, but also, you know, in France, like it's very hard to do genre films. Like it's really something the industry has been struggling with. There are now new initiative, but it's still very, very not many. And for the level of budget that I need, which was not a huge budget, but was not a very small budget, I knew that I wouldn't find the financing that I would need. So from the start, I knew that this story first resonated. It felt the right language for me, also because, you know, this idea of having some kind of main cultural elements that become some kind of tyranny, which is very, very widely diffused by films and media, resonated in a kind of natural way, which is also the cinema I grew up with. And so I think part of my creativity is also very grew up with the United States. So yeah, all those elements, because when I write, I always think about the way I'm gonna be able to produce and finance and make the film in a very realistic way, because I think if you have impossible expectations, you lose a lot of time. So I always try to think about my ambition are, you know, realistic, depending of what I want to do, where I am in my career, so as to give the best chance to the project to really transmit what I want. So I knew from the start that I needed not to make it in France, but not to make it totally in the US either, because I knew that that was a place where I could also very easily lose the creative control. And for me, it was all about creative control. It was all about making it in a very uncompromising way. That's why I needed to stay to have one leg very strongly staying in Europe, with France, where I shot the film, and also with the UK and this European part of the production with a working title. And so that was kind of the hybrid monstro way of, you know, kind of thinking the production of the film itself, which I think needed specific rules because the movie was pretty, yes, unconventional in its final form, I would say.
Thank you, Coralie. For Ali, I would never have considered Sebastian Stan for Trump, and he was fantastic. Was it intentional for him to become more of the caricature of Trump as the film progressed?
Yeah, I mean, you can sort of, the way I look at Donald Trump's character is he's always playing another character. And those characters changes, you know, the person he, you know, and good thing about these guys' lives, him, Roy Cohn to a certain extent, Ivana, many of these characters that, are depicted in The Apprentice, there's a lot of footage. So there's a lot of real life reference, and that's also the difficult part, obviously. But you can see, if you look at an interview from 70s, you see a certain Donald Trump. He's sort of, he's a bit uncertain, talks in this monotonous, a little bit like sort of a wannabe banker, accountant kind of voice. He wants to sound wiser and older than he is. And he doesn't sound like crazy, he sounds ambitious. He wants to do stuff in New York, it's like, sounds like someone who wants to build buildings, In the 80s, that character changes to sort of the King of New York character, and it's like starts boasting and nothing is better, nothing is bigger, and blah blah. And then by the late 80s, it starts to feels a little bit like the end of Al Pacino in Scarface. It's like things are disintegrating, but he's trying it very hard. It's like, and in the 90s, then you have like you really feel like he's doing a parody of himself. And then I can go on and on, but the point is that when you see the trajectory of a real Donald Trump, he didn't start having these lip movements and the hand movements and all that, and those came actually gradually. And that's basically what we try to imitate that. Also because I think a person's the whole sort of mission for us was to treat Donald Trump as a person, Roy Cohn as a person, as a human being. And therefore I'm interested in their minutiae of like how they how they talk, how, like, I was very obsessed with, not as much as himself maybe, but I was very obsessed with Donald's hair, because I do believe that the way that hair is combed or shaped in different decades, it's an indication of an internal sort of how it feels inside. In the 70s, I know this sounds like really maybe geeky, stupid, whatever, but bear with me. In 70s, for example, he had this like sort of he was like, he was calm, but he was not like super calm. He was like a little bit loose, a little bit like, uh, you could see that he wants to be like a bit organic or a bit boyish or whatever. In the 80s, there's a lot of gel, and it's perfect. And then by mid 80s, you start feeling like, is he hiding something? Why is it like, it's like in this like sort of, it's start to become three-dimensional, And by late 80s, you have the fox, And then, you can see different variations of it, and you really feel like his sense of self, worth, security, all that being dependent on his hair. And it's the same with those gestures. I think they're all sort of, it comes on top and on top and on top. And in the movie, I think that the function of all this is really, I don't think you go and see The Apprentice and you learn something that you couldn't have learned by reading the Wikipedia page on Donald Trump, But the point is experiencing it. Experiencing the transformation from someone who's not completely abnormal, to someone who is an outlier in any way you want to sort of talk about it. And that goes through all these small gestures and gesticulations, step by step by step. Yeah.
I don't think that's crazy at all. It's crazy how we do think about his hair, I think, because I was thinking about it the other day. I saw a clip of him and I'm like, oh, he's wearing it shorter. He's got it cropped a little closer. He's got it, and I don't know, you just do automatically think about his hair because he is his hair. I think, what you're
You see,
saying is
I
right.
read that, and I know it sounds like, again, maybe a bit absurd, but I read that as is the same guy, but this time he's more disciplined and he's more tight and he has a better plan and he has more self-confidence. That's
Yeah.
how I read it.
Well, we're unfortunately out of time. There are so many other things that I would love to ask you, but I just want to say thank you so much to everybody for coming and participating. Such a wonderful conversation. Good luck to all of you who are in contention for awards, and thank you so much for making these films. I know you all put years and years and years of effort into these fantastic films, so thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.